Welcome to the Recruiter Startup Podcast. I am joined today by Rod Hore from HHMC Global. How are you, sir?
I'm very good, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, great stuff, man. Firstly, what part of Perth do you live in?
I live in the western suburbs of Perth in Western Australia, and so I'm pretty close to the beach. And this doesn't mean much on a day like this in the middle of winter, but
Yeah.
it's a pretty good place to be.
Which neighbourhood do you live in? I'm
Mount Claremont. Mount Claremont.
Lovely. Yeah,
Yeah.
we lived in Perth for 4 years. I had a great time there, and unfortunately, my wife wanted to be a little bit closer to her family in the UK. But I had a catch up at the weekend with some buddies who started out in recruitment with me, and
Yeah.
we reminisced a lot about the good old days in Perth. I hear the city has changed a lot in the last 6 years.
Yeah, the mining boom that came through in this century has been really good for Perth, and there's been a lot of development and a lot of growth. Not quite so active right at the moment, but yeah, it's a lovely place to live. And I lived away for 23 years, so I'm really pleased to be back here.
Yeah. Where did you live?
Sydney and Canberra.
Okay, great stuff.
Mm.
So tell us a little bit about what your business does.
Yeah, so HHMC Global is best known for mergers and acquisitions. We started in 1999, so we've been going for a good period now. Obviously very deeply involved in the Australian-New Zealand marketplace, but about half of our work has got some international flavour. So we travel a lot, and we've got a lot of contacts around the world and participate as much as we can in the global recruitment industry.
Okay, great. Let's start with the Australian New Zealand market. Who's typically the buyer, and what are they looking for generally?
Yeah, we do in the Australian New Zealand market. We do more transactions that are between local companies, so a local buyer and a local seller. But the big headline numbers especially over the last 5 or 6 years, have been international purchases into the country. So the top portion of the pyramid, the largest private companies in Australia, have pretty well been taken out over the last 4 or 5 years. Big influence by the Japanese companies, but also UK and North America.
What is it that attracts the Japanese buyers to the Australian market?
Partly to do with time zone, I'm guessing. It's a little bit easier to make their first foray into a sort of a Western economy. Australia's got a lot of similarities to, say, UK and the US, and it's pretty easy to get between Japan and Australia. It's a mere 8 or 9 hours or 10 hours flying, so it's relatively close. And also the market was probably primed for a series of acquisitions to happen, and so yeah, they did.
What was it about the market that was primed?
I think we'd come out of the financial crisis in 2008 and 9 without too much of a dip. So we had a very short, sharp dip. Our GDP didn't go negative. We didn't go into recession. And so as the market continued to grow, there were some really profitable, highly, fast-growing companies, and they were good targets.
So it's fair to say Japanese buyers or private equity or maybe public companies looking to acquire national companies is generally the trend?
Yeah, although the public companies in Australia are fairly quiet. In the period sort of 2000 to 2010 or 2000 to the financial crisis, they were fairly active, but since then they've been less active. And it's private equity is also not as big in Australia as it would be in the UK or the US.
Okay.
And so it tends to be international companies, which are either private equity backed or they're listed, or the more aggressive private companies.
And when they're looking for a company, I remember working in Australia that quite a large part of it felt like Perth was a little bit disjointed from the rest of the country. Does it really matter for a recruitment company to have like a presence in Perth, Brisbane, Canberra, Melbourne, and Sydney, or do you just like if somebody has got a good Sydney business, is that like okay, that's enough?
It does depend on the sector. So when you get into mining and oil and gas, you've got to be a bit more where the where you need to be, which is sort of more Brisbane and Perth. But for most other sectors, you need to be either in Sydney or Melbourne or both, because that's where the big activity is. They're the economic powerhouses, and then it's a bit of a choice as to whether you go broader than that, depending on what your strategy is. But you can quite easily survive these days by being just in Melbourne or just in Sydney, or maybe in both of those.
Let's jump into a couple of the other marketplaces. Let's touch upon New Zealand quickly.
Yeah.
What is that market? It's a market I don't know tremendously well. What does it look like from your standpoint?
Oh, well, it's a good market. It has its own ebb and flow. It does suffer. It's probably, and this is probably a bad analogy, it's probably a little bit like Canada sitting next to the United States. You've got a big brother next door. So the market of New Zealand is less than the market of either Sydney or Melbourne, I'm guessing.
Wow.
And so Auckland is their main area, and that's a bit more like dealing with, say, Brisbane. And that's not being negative or anything. It's just a smaller place, but it's a very bullish market. There's been some good activity there. We've done some really nice transactions there, and we consider it a really important part of this region, because there's a lot of similarities and a lot of flow between the two countries, and that will continue.
Would it be a lot of Australian national companies or public companies buying New Zealand businesses, or is it?
The international companies. The Australian market is pretty well dominated by the international organisations. So the biggest companies in the world all operate in Australia, and most of them have an operation in New Zealand. Some don't, but most of them do.
Hayes, Half, Walters, Page,
Yeah,
Hudson.
Yep. Hayes is huge in Australia. Manpower, Randstad, etc. They're all here. They're all operating.
So the New Zealand Australia forms a large portion of your portfolio. Where else do you deal with?
Yeah, we've been fortunate that over the years we've built really good relationships in other countries. Strangely, we do a fair bit of activity in India.
Really,
we love India. We think it's it's a great emerging economy. We just like the way they do business. But our number one international market is the UK, and that makes a lot of sense when you look at the number of UK or the number of people who work in the recruitment industry who got their start in the UK who now operate in Australia. Many of them own businesses. There's a great relationship between the two countries. We also work up into North America, so the US and Canada is good for us. But within our time zone, we try and work in the more developed markets in our time zone. So that's Japan, the number 2 market in the world, Hong Kong, maybe less so these days, Singapore, India, and then a little bit of some of the other countries.
Let's jump into the UK.
We personally haven't done much in China, but China is now a bigger market than Australia, so it's emerging really strongly.
That deal flow in the UK and Australia, who's buying who? I'm guessing it's UK buyers into Australia, or is there vice versa?
Mostly. Yeah, mostly. There's a little bit the other way. I think that'll grow. I think that'll increase. I'm personally a big fan of Brexit, so I'm glad that finally got through.
We'll not hold that against you. What as a European living in the UK, tell me what was it about Brexit that you're really for and you think it's good?
I think that Australia's relationship with the UK had become more difficult over time. So it's more difficult for people to travel to the UK. It's more difficult for qualifications that are got in Australia to be relevant in the UK without some sort of bridging arrangement. And that's very different to what it was 20 or 30 years ago, where there was obviously a great flow of people between the two countries. There's still good things, but I think it can be so much better. And there's a free trade agreement being negotiated as we speak.
What's that going to look like, do you think?
Well, there's politicians on both sides, so it's a little hard to tell. But I would expect that's not just physical goods. So, for example, Australia's had a lot of difficulty selling its agricultural products into the European Union. I would expect that would be a little bit easier to negotiate with just the UK. What I'm looking for the recruitment industry and for HHMC Global is that there's an easier transfer of talent between the two countries, and that'll encourage the recruitment companies to do more business between each other, and I want to be part of that.
Yeah, it's the requirements to get a UK recruiter to Australia is a joke at the moment.
Yeah,
Uh, like it when we
it's
started this
really complicated.
it's a waste of time. We started it 5 years ago, and it was our biggest marketplace. And I can tell you one thing: for the last 2 years, all the talented UK recruiters, 90% of them, all have gone to the US. And the
Yeah,
US and all these UK companies in the US have had tremendous growth on the back of the talent that Australia's missed out on. And
yep.
before, I used to get more going to Australia than America. And they just made it really hard. And yeah, it's a
Yeah, not
shame.
for not for good reasons. And um, I've been on a trade delegation to the US and sort of sat in the room and listened to some of those UK recruiters who were planning their businesses, and then watched them grow over the last couple of years. I mean, people have this misunderstanding of the United States that it's actually really difficult to get visas and difficult to get into, but it's not the case. If you sit in Australia, if you sit in the UK, they're almost welcoming you with open arms. And unfortunately, Australia is a complicated place to get to at the moment. Well,
Yeah,
especially right now, but ignoring current conditions,
yeah.
it's still a difficult place to get to.
On that visa front, it's actually easier if
Yeah,
you're an Australian with a degree. It's a slam dunk. You can get in straight away. UK on an E2, it's got a bit complex to get to the US, but we're hoping that the new administration, when it comes in, is going to maybe open it up a little bit again. But
mm,
I have a lot of people in limbo at the moment. I feel for them,
yeah.
they're waiting to get to the US. And so, talk to me a bit about your own business in the US and how that's evolved over time. Has it been a growing market for you?
The US is really complicated for us because I mean, it's large, as you know, um, and most recruitment agencies in the United States don't have a need to get outside the US. I mean, there is so much opportunity where they are. They can just go to another state. They can go to another city, and so when you try and talk to them about saying, "Well, I've got this opportunity for you in Asia Pacific," they just look at you like you're from Mars, because that sounds really complicated compared to the things that are on their whiteboard that they can go and execute.
Yeah,
Um, but there is a small percentage of US companies, which is a large number, that are interested in global expansion or international expansion, and we want to be their partner in Asia Pacific and help them do that.
okay, interesting.
Yeah, so
Uh,
it's a small part of our market,
yeah.
um, but the US is really important from a strategy point of view,
Hmm.
and it's got potential from an M&A perspective in Asia Pacific, and we make sure that we put enough energy into that so that we're well known.
Surely there must be a market for UK recruitment companies buying American firms.
You would think so, absolutely. I mean, there's some great case studies out of the UK over the last couple of years of people who've organically done it, but eventually there will be an M&A stream to that as well.
But Hayes are the biggest one with Veritas that I've come across.
Mm,
Um, I think they struggled for a long time to get a presence, and maybe they followed more the blueprint that Walters and Page had gone, and
yeah,
didn't get the same success as S3 and similar type companies. It's
mm. Yeah.
fascinating.
Look, and people talk about cultural differences and all those sorts of things, but if you've got a really good business model and you know how to engage people and keep people active and productive in that, then most business models with a bit of tweaking will work in most locations. That's a generalization, but yeah.
So that's a bit of a market update on the M&A space. How have things changed since COVID in terms for the buyer and for the seller?
Um, um, Mergers and acquisitions rely on business confidence. So business owners who are going to write a check and buy something, they need to be able to see out into the future and to have confidence about the market in the future.
Mm.
That's gone away. So most of the buyers have gone away. On the seller's side, it's a very complex situation for somebody who was earning this sort of level of profit and is
Yeah.
now earning something significantly less, and it's very difficult for them to sit down and have a conversation about the current value of their business. And so, most of the sellers actually don't want to come to the market either. So our business goes into hibernation in periods like this. We spend a lot of time talking to people. We do a few little projects,
Mm.
but the confidence on both parties
Yeah.
disappears, and it'll take some time to come back. Right at the moment, there are more buyers than sellers in the market. There are a lot of people who've made a lot of money over the last decade or so, and a lot of people are still in a very strong position during this period,
Yeah.
and they'd like to execute their plans, but it's very difficult for them to do that.
And with these buyers, given that there's more buyers than sellers, does that affect the ultimate multiple? And I know that's based on the EBITDA and stuff, but
Yeah. No, nobody's going to overpay for anything at the moment. I think everybody is very risk aware.
yeah,
Maybe during the heady days of the market growing and the economy growing and so on, then everybody relaxes a little bit on the risk analysis. But right at the moment, everybody's very, very brightly tuned onto the risk analysis. So there's nobody going to overpay for anything.
how much do you do buy side compared to sell side, and where do you come into the process?
Um, it's a similar but different process, whether our client is the buy side or the sell side. So we only work on mandates. We
Yeah.
don't do contingent work, and over the time, about 50% of our revenue comes from the buy side or the sell side. Having said that, when our client is on the sell side, they tend to be smaller transactions. When our client is on the buy side, they tend to be larger transactions. So we like both. It's a really good and different mix for us to have as part of our business. And we get involved very early. So quite often for a buyer, we're helping them with some things like market strategy or board paper preparation. For the seller, we might be doing some work with them to help them get ready and to go and fix up a few things internally before we take them to the market. So we get involved pretty early. It's a long project for us.
Is it around a 3-year project, or how long would you say that cycle is?
Sometimes, although we don't formalize it to that level. So we might have various touch points with organizations while they get to the point where they're going to sell. But an actual sale process or a buy process is, maybe 6 months, maybe 9 months.
Do you have a bench of recruitment NEDs that go in and do the work, and the same with the financial people that do the due diligence?
Not in that formal a sense. We've got a whole range of people that we trust who are advisors in the marketplace. It could be really simple things like they need training, they need better use of technology, so sometimes it's a bit more strategic, and you want a higher level advisor to go in and work with them on strategy or some other activity. So most organisations could be improved before they go to market. I'm trying to be polite here. I mean, everybody's got skeletons in the closet, right? And you need to clean those out a little bit before you go to market. And so there's no rule of thumb about what we might do with an organisation beforehand.
And when you look at the strategy of current recruitment firms, COVID has obviously decentralized and will decentralize a lot of the cities. How do you see this world of remote work working with companies and how they're like their future?
We did some research on this going back a couple of months ago, and so I think people were still a little bit in the panic mode, and it'll be interesting to revisit that in a few months' time when they've got used to whatever the new world is. I think the strategy and the leadership capability of a lot of recruitment company owners has really been found out this year, and that's not something too negative. I mean, nobody was prepared for this, but when you've been running a recruitment agency and your whole model was about having people in the room and running a sort of a dealer room type environment, obviously that's been blown apart, and so you need different communication methods, you need different engagement methods, you need possibly different technology and a whole range of other things to be able to keep that productivity level up. For quite a few recruitment company owners, I think it's been a real fast learning period.
For everybody.
Well, for everybody, yeah. And you can't assume how anybody's going. I mean, when you're talking to people, there's every possible reaction out there. But in terms of overall strategy for recruitment, I'm not sure too many things are going to change other than during this period, it's not a time for high sales, or for hard sales. It's more, if you haven't got a consultative approach as part of your go-to-market and with clients and with candidates, then you're probably not being very successful at the moment.
Yeah. It may help the turnover within recruitment agencies. I think we have a culture of bringing grads in and smashing them for a year, and then the best one of 5 survives. I think the work from home and a bit more flexibility may allow parents and other people in the industry to stay a bit longer, manage those stress levels?
I think so. And one of the big differences between the UK and Australia is that the UK has this big magnet which draws everybody into London, and then when people get sick of that, they go somewhere else. That's a rash generalisation, of course,
Yeah.
but I mean, Australia is probably a little bit more spread out, even though it's around the coast and a very small, very small population in a large country. And I think we all of us have not been very good at working remotely and encouraging people to do things from remote locations and non-city locations, and I think that will improve. And part of this getting away from having this dealer room type environment where everybody's under pressure and can be seen by the boss will, I'm sure, change the style of people that are brought into the industry and how they're mentored and coached and taught and what technology you use and so on. So maybe there'll be a softer approach to the recruitment industry, which can be quite brutal at times.
It can. But yeah, here's hoping. The other thing that always struck me about this, having worked in Australia, the UK, and the States, the Australian market, it feels like it's much more relationship driven. You have to meet the person face to face. You have to have like 20,000 coffees. You have to be like doing all of that. Whereas in the other markets, they're like, what do you have? Do you have it today?
Yeah.
Give it right now.
Yep.
No, I don't want to meet you. I'll meet you if I have to meet you. That there's a big. Has COVID changed that relationship element? Now that you can't meet face to face, or it's a bit more difficult, or are they being a bit more transactional in Australia? Do you know?
I don't think they're being more transactional. I think they're just being a bit more forgiving to say that I'll do business with you even though we haven't met. So I think the relationship thing is something that is a little bit uniquely Australian when you compare it to the US and the UK.
I agree.
Yeah, and the US especially. When I worked in the IT industry, I was often dealing with people who lived thousands of miles away from the company that I was dealing with, but they were a senior member. They just, once every 2 months or something, they'd turn up at the office and have a chat to people. And that was decades ago. So Australia's got a long way to go to get to that level. I think people will still look for the personal relationship. So I expect conferences and in-house training and all those sorts of things to continue, because I still think people want to bond and want to form those relationships, whether that's intercompany or between customers and clients and so on. But how that happens is yet to be seen. And the goodwill that's in the process at the moment, where everybody's doing things over Zoom and so on, I think that will continue for some time. But if we're still in this position in 12 months' time, people might be a little bit grumpy with that. So I just don't know how it's going to evolve, or how quickly it's going to evolve in terms of not having coffee meetings.
All right. Well, Rod, that's us for today. Where can people find you? Who should reach out to you?
Our website is hhmc.com.au, the Australian website, and really look forward to all the contact details are on there. Love to talk to people. We're on LinkedIn, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're everywhere. So look forward to talking to people, look forward to answering anybody's questions, and hope to see a lot more business between Australia and the rest of the world as we go forward.
Well, we'll love to welcome you into our leadership network, and I'll send you some more details on that. And yeah, thanks so much. Lovely to get a little bit of taste of Perth again. Beautiful city.
Yes.
I miss it more in the winter than the summer.
Well,
winter.
Today you wouldn't miss it. It's cold and wet. So, but anyway, that happens occasionally.
Well, thanks so much, Rod. Take care.
All right. Have fun. Thank you.